Hello, everybody, and thank you for making time to check out some content on jumpstarting the private school admission process in New York City. My name is Randi Dumont, and I'm a school placement advisor for Evolved Education with expertise particularly in middle and high school entry points. And prior to consulting, I spent almost a decade as an associate director of admission at a residential boarding school in Groton, Mass. There, I interviewed roughly 200 prospective families and reviewed about 400 applications per admission cycle. I absolutely loved it, and I actually miss it quite a lot, especially the kids in the community. But at this point in my career, I feel pretty well seasoned to teach about the nuances of the admissions process, as well as helping families understand their school options. I also feel as though my own student experiences in both public and private school systems has given me a unique perspective on the values each of those school settings has to offer to a child and family. But today we're going to be exclusively exploring the private school avenue. So let's jump right into it here because there's a lot to cover. Let me just give you a quick overview of the format presentation before we dive in. First, we'll explore some of the differentiating factors of private school. So for those of you who are new to the landscape, we'll just give you a general sense of their characteristics. Second, we will review the totality of the admission cycle from a wider lens, just to ground you in a general timeline of the process. And then third, we're going to break down each segment of the admission cycle, and I'll provide you with some guidance for how to actually move through each of those stages with some confidence. And finally, we're going to discuss how you can stay connected with Evolved Education should you want continued support from our team. Okay, so let's quickly start off by identifying some of the primary characteristics of the New York City private school landscape. So number one, private schools tend to be tuition-based, and they will reflect a wide range of baseline costs, as well as financial aid availability. While financial aid is available at most of these schools, their ability to meet the needs of each family is going to vary based on their budgets. So if financial aid is going to be a big part of your process, you'll definitely want to focus on things like the endowment in relation to the enrollment size, this percentage of students who are admitted who are on financial aid, or percentage of students in the student body on financial aid, or any sort of sliding scale options for more information on how a school might be able to meet your financial needs. Some schools will even provide some like virtual financial aid calculators so you can get a sense of what you might qualify for. All right, second, many private schools try to maintain a lower student-teacher ratio, and they tend to pride themselves on being able to provide high-quality instruction to their students. Smaller class sizes are meant to provide more time and attention to individual students and allow students to participate or ask questions more readily. Resources, private schools develop their own source of funding, which is typically taken care of by school development offices and or alumni relations employees. So their resources come entirely from their financial donors. Tuition revenue and donated funds are often fed back into the school in the form of enhanced facilities, unique programming, updated technology, sometimes higher paid faculty, which is awesome, financial aid, or any other areas of meaning for the school. The teachers in private school are likely to be pretty connected to the community. They're also likely to be more multifaceted and highly visible to their students. So you'll see a lot of them are coaches or will run an extracurricular program, and they'll be in multiple spaces in the school. You'll often see that the majority of faculty in New York City private schools also have some sort of advanced degree and also have more involvement in the decisions made over the curriculum. So you have many high quality invested educators in these institutions. So this naturally leads into the curriculum or school's approach to education. So the Department of Education does not dictate any facets of a private school's curriculum, whether it's academic, social, emotional, extracurricular, or otherwise. So this is why you'll find a wide array of unique offerings from school to school. Private schools also have full jurisdiction over how they want to implement their curriculum as well. A whole spectrum of teaching and learning approaches exist, from the more classic sort of traditional education to student-centered, out-of-the-box, more progressive education, and pretty much everything in between. Next, the types of communities and school cultures found in private schools across New York City come in a wide variety of options. The majority of schools found in the 5 boroughs are day schools. However, there are a few boarding schools like Lamont Prep and St. Thomas Choir School, both located in Manhattan, and then there are a handful of others located just north of the city. New York also offers schools founded upon a wide variety of world religions, the most populated in this region being Roman Catholic, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic-based schools. You can also find private schools that are specialized either in their academic missions, like IB or International Baccalaureate schools that have a very specific curriculum, or intend to serve students with specific learning needs. There's also usually this intentionality around inviting parents into the life of the school or contributing to some sort of parent network. And lastly, the admission process in the private school landscape here follows a slightly different timeline and dramatically different set of expectations as compared to applying for public high schools. Applying to private schools in this region is generally pretty time consuming. It requires a good investment of your time because there's really no one-stop shop sort of database that you can go to as a source of comparison between schools or to get this broad sweeping data, unlike public schools that do have these bigger databases that you can access. So in addition, timelines to submit materials are also a little bit different from school to school. So families are really required to keep track of the many to-dos throughout the admission stages. So let's first talk about what this cycle entails and then where to specifically focus your energy, okay? So this graphic here illustrates the general stages of an admission cycle. And this is just to give you a macro sense of what to expect. So from start to finish, the enrollment management for most schools takes about 1 year to complete, okay? And if you're looking for school placement for the fall of 2022, which is next fall, the beginning of your school search process will generally begin in the spring or summer of 2021. So you're on time right now. We're in July, so if you haven't started yet, it's no problem at all. So your research phase is going to include learning about things like your child's educational needs, investigating what schools match your preferences, registering for standardized tests, and determining what schools you'll ultimately want to apply to, okay? Next is the visiting stage. This generally takes place in person. However, with this whole last year and the necessitation of virtual events, many schools now have ways to kind of visit on demand through their digital platforms. So most schools right now are actually still determining how they're going to handle on-campus experiences this year. So you should expect to see kind of a wide variety or just varied ways of handling the on-campus experience this fall. For middle and high school entry, most schools are going to require an application fee prior to moving forward with any formal visits, any formal interviews, or submission of materials. Again, there's no uniform way of scheduling an official visit. So some schools will ask you to submit an application and then wait for a phone call, while others are going to ask that you proactively schedule your visit manually. And they'll usually give you a link to do that. Next, generally you can expect all schools will require some form of an official transcript. So this is the application period. You'll expect submitting a transcript, teacher recommendations, student and parent statements, as well as doing the interviews. Supplemental materials will also slightly vary from school to school. Some are going to continue to keep testing optional this year, while others might require students to sit for an internal subject-specific assessment. And some will ask students to submit a piece of writing or some kind of work that they've done previously. So for the schools requiring standardized testing this year, most will take the ISEE or the SSAT. And information about both of those tests are abundantly available on their websites, but you should plan to register for your standardized test no later than about 6 weeks in advance of your test date. Both of these tests also have a variety of test-taking options, which is newer in the testing landscape. And this includes, taking your test at home and being virtually proctored. You can actually physically go to a proctoring test center or a proctored test center. You can use a computer or paper-based method. And now I think each of them are going to be including some more flexible testing scheduling as well. Whereas in the past, you have maybe had to register for a test. You only have like one test you can take per month or per testing period. So there's going to be more flexible testing scheduling for families as well, which is great. Both ISEE and SSAT also acknowledge testing accommodations and fee waivers, but you have to sort of go through a requesting process for that. We recommend that most families aim to complete the application prior to the beginning of the holiday season at the latest. So then once you're done with your work, schools will be evaluating candidates and they'll be making the majority of their enrollment decisions between December and February. So this is definitely more of a waiting period for families. Once you receive an admission decision, schools will designate the amount of time a family has to give a response, which is generally anywhere between about 2 weeks to a month from the time the decision is released. So schools within the Independent School Admission Association of Greater New York, broken down to ISAAGNY, those schools in that sort of consortium or that part of that governing board will all adhere to similar timelines. And there's a good amount of schools in private schools in New York that are ISAAGNY schools, SAGNY schools. So that is helpful if you're applying to schools that are mostly in that consortium because the timelines will be similar. But the major takeaway here is to understand that you really will need to pay close attention to material requirements and deadlines at each school because there is no uniform application process for the full scope of private schools represented in the city. So much like we do with any other complex task in life, what's helpful is breaking down this process into a more achievable, digestible, segmentation that will help you feel more confident with your plannings, right? So we're going to do that. So just for example, let's consider the admission process as analogous to something super relatable like getting dressed every day, right? So when we get up in the morning, the first part of our behavioral pyramid is to consider what the conditions are outside, right? So is there a heat wave today? Is the subway going to be underwater? Or is today a good day to wear my favorite sweater? Essentially, what we're doing is seeking information to better inform our decision-making calculus for choosing an appropriate outfit, right? So much like getting up in the morning and examining the weather, when you're stepping into the private school admission scene, you have to consider the context as a first step. So this initial work will inform and shape how you build your school list. And it's really important that you take time to do this work. So let's discuss what this actually entails and how to understand your context a little bit better, okay? So because New York City has such a wide range of school options, this process is going to be incredibly hard to jumpstart without having a basic understanding of your child's educational needs, okay? So what are those? How do you define educational needs? We can think about educational needs as defined by any number of characteristics that contribute to your child's ability to thrive in their learning, okay? So areas of focus may include things like what are their learning preferences, consider their zone of proximal development, which essentially means, in what kind of environment will they need to be in to really maximize their potential with support, but not so much support that they're not learning anything. Social emotional learning, environmental settings, or really any other factors that impacts the way that children learn, right? So we know that there are infinite variations to how our brains function. So every single child who enters this process will require an individualized approach to maximizing their potential. So think of it as like a 360 evaluation that you receive at work, right? So you do the exercise to gain insight and help you develop as a professional. Same goes for your child in searching for best at schools, right? And that's a big part of what Evolved Education does, is take that time to really deep dive into each student's individual situation. So you can better your child's educational profile, or you better understand your child's educational profile by asking questions such as, how does my child see themselves as a learner? Or how do teachers see my child as a learner? When does my child feel most engaged in school? Who are my child's trusted adults and why? What kind of mentors are my children or my child gravitating toward? How does my child most prefer to demonstrate their learning? What are my child's academic, social, and emotional strengths and weaknesses? What kinds of challenges do I see my child thriving under? And then what do teachers or other adults say about working with my child? Okay, so that's just sort of the beginning of how you can sort of get after what your child's needs might be in this process. Second, while children in early adolescence are still very much growing and evolving, they should definitely feel empowered to contribute to this process. You really want to walk alongside your child as you're going through this school search. So in my work as admission counselor, I feel like, I was really saddened by the number of students I interviewed who really kind of just appeared to be along for the ride rather than actually engaged in the process. And middle and high school age students are fully capable of self-reflection, goal setting, and making decisions for themselves, right? Like, we don't always love the way that they do that, but these qualities are all become very evident in the application process, both, when kids self-reflect and also to the people evaluating them. So it's more important, it's important for kids to feel as though they have some agency in their search for a new school. So for parents, viewing this journey as a team or family process is really essential in getting your child on board with their engagement. And sometimes involving other trusted adults is helpful when family dynamics maybe make it challenging for your child to either open up or be honest about their feelings in the process. I know that's sometimes hard to recognize, but definitely lean into opportunities to have your child engage with other people about this as well. So third, every parent enters this process with their own prior educational experiences, philosophy, and values, right? So it's important to evaluate your own preferences and see how those align with your partner, if you have one, and your child. So for example, if you feel strongly about your child receiving a single sex education, think about why this might be the case and allow your reflections to enter the conversation with your family members. So having this kind of sustained dialogue as a family is going to help solidify where everyone is in terms of where they're connecting and maybe where there needs to be further discussion about how everybody moves forward with this process. And the more connected you are with your partner, if you have one, and your child, honestly, the more enjoyable and fulfilling the experience is going to be for everybody involved. Okay, so the result of all this contextual analysis is being able to identify what kinds of preferences will sort of help you develop a preliminary school list. Okay. So I just want to give you a quick snapshot of what types of factors you may consider when building your school list. Okay, so number one, school type, things like, do you want a day school or a boarding school? Do you want co-ed or single sex? The student schedule. What does the structure of the day look like? And is this a rhythm that's going to, best serve my child or, logistically fit with our family schedule? Location is something a lot of people consider, especially in the city. Convenience matters, honestly, especially if you want your child to take part in school activities or anything happening after school, or if they're part of club programs at Chelsea Piers or wherever, and you have to do all this driving. Consider the commuting times and the transportation options provided by the schools. Fourth, community. Consider both, the average class size and total enrollment. So does your child need to be in a smaller classroom where maybe there's more space to engage? Or are you maybe more concerned about your child having a wider range of social experiences and maybe some, neurodiversity or being around kids from all different kinds of backgrounds? So consider how the community is built. Educational philosophy. So most independent schools or private schools in the city fall along a continuum between traditional and progressive. But what does that actually mean? So you'll have to investigate, what that actually means and what it looks like in school settings. So asking questions like, how are the classes taught? How are expectations conveyed? What are the learning objectives? How are students asked to demonstrate their learning? How are the learning objectives measured? Things like that. Curriculum. So you'll want to know maybe what courses are offered, what courses are required for graduation, how many paths to graduation can you have at this school, what are the electives offered, in what order are you teaching certain classes. Essentially, you're going to be asking questions that get to the bottom of, does this curriculum fit my child's learning needs? Faculty, that might be a consideration for you. I think a lot of schools have faculty directories online, so some have profiles, sometimes don't, but you definitely want to get to the bottom of, or you might be interested in learning more about the kinds of teachers in that school environment. Facilities, excuse me, in addition to the overall condition of the school, you definitely want to look at facilities your child might use, right? So, is the art department well stocked? Are sports facilities well equipped? Are the computers up to date? What kinds of language or labs exist? Things like that. Special programs or important programming and extracurriculars. What does the school provide that fits what your kid's interested in, right? So consider, the arts, athletics, leadership opportunities, any community-based or service programs, global opportunities maybe, and of course, any sort of academic support options for kids who might need, some of that additional support in the classroom. Essentially, is this school a place where your child can blossom? So again, talking about that zone of proximal development. And then finally, probably most importantly, what is the school's commitment to serving students of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds? So financial aid is something that's going to be a consideration for you. You might want to look at, what percentage of students receive those grants and what is the average grant. So that might be part of your list as well. So this is just a sample, but ultimately, no matter how you build this list of preferences, taking time to reflect on the needs of your child and your family educational philosophy is a strongly recommended exercise for sure. Okay, so we're coming up the pyramid now, right? So back to our analogy. So after we either look outside or finish scrolling through our weather app, we have to get out of bed and see what our options are in the closet, right? So sometimes our favorite pants are in the laundry, so we'll have to reassess the whole outfit. Other times we know we might be walking a lot during the day, so we want to choose an outfit that's going to withstand the wear. Or occasionally we're like in the midst of, changing our style and half our clothes don't feel like, an accurate self, expression or representation, right? So clearly lots to consider when you're standing in front of your closet each morning. Taking inventory of your school options is also a necessary second stage of exploring your educational planning. But there's so much information out there, and whether you're new to the scene or returning with a second child, there is a lot to organize. Everybody has a different approach to keeping their lives in order, so every individual is going to require their own way of tracking the material, right? Here are some of the major categories that you'll want to focus on and pay attention to as you develop your organizational mapping. Okay, so research and events. So as we know, or you can maybe assume, last admission cycle, COVID really threw a wrench into the way schools traditionally catered to their prospective families. So on-campus events became non-existent, and the virtual platforms completely took over. Virtual events are definitely here to stay. It's so easy for schools to repost webinars, host Q&As, or recycle some of their virtual tours or any content. So that's kind of a good place to start. If you're early in the process, you'll need to check out individual websites to see how schools are managing their events this fall, and how they're managing their content, their digital marketing or communications material. Because a lot of schools right now are still in the midst of figuring out their protocols. I suspect by about mid-August, I would guess at the latest, mid-August, most schools will be able to communicate more clearly about their event management. So definitely keep an eye on websites for updates, or just really just call the admission office directly. I think that's sometimes the easiest way to get information quickly. There are a few kind of larger forum resources out there, like Parentsly. They typically host school fairs where you can actually connect with many school representatives in one event, and that can be really helpful for people. It's obviously not in person this year, but it's going to be hosted virtually, and they have 2 dates for that. One is in late September and late October. Just check out their website to get more information there. So school admission offices, it's in their best interest to make their application timeline and to-dos as transparent as possible. So this information really should be readily available to you on all of their individual websites. I think that a nice sort of like example of a layout of their timeline and materials can be found on Nightingale Bamford's admission page. So check that out as a place to start, maybe in terms of what, how to look for those timelines and deadlines. So the application, know right now that you won't be able to submit all of your application materials in one fell swoop or with a singular click of a button. You will need to tackle each piece in stages and in a thoughtful manner. So definitely give yourself time to do this in multiple and many, sittings. If you know 100% right now at the outset that you're going to be applying to a school, get on their website and pay the application fee once the application is released, and get your eyes on all the different components of the application so you know what kind of work is ahead. Schools will use different application platforms, and most of those won't let you see the contents of the application without first submitting a fee. So dive into the application as soon as you can if you already have that confidence in your school list. And I think most schools will be releasing their applications sometimes in late August or early September. But no matter how you choose to get yourself organized, I strongly recommend using a singular email for all the application logins and school correspondence. So either create a new one entirely or make sure you're using an email you check regularly, because schools rely pretty heavily on email correspondence to inform their prospective families. So let's just quickly go back to our analogy and think of it this way, right? So if your clothes are strewn about and your physical space is totally chaotic, it's going to be pretty difficult to know where to direct your attention, right? And getting ready in the morning is going to become a hassle or even a barrier to moving forward in the day. The same goes for how you organize your responsibilities in the school admission process. So find a system that works for you and get started as soon as you can. Okay, so we're climbing the pyramid here. So we've checked the weather, we've taken inventory of our options, then comes the inevitable test run of our clothing choices each day, right? So sometimes we try on a new sweater only to find out that it was clearly an impulse buy and really only fits well if you plan to sit perfectly still. Other times we feel immediately connected to what we throw on in the morning and move forward with no hesitation. That's great. Every so often, our vision of how an outfit might look versus how it actually looks once it's on can vary significantly. So before committing fully to your daily outfit or school, you have to try it on and see how it feels. So you can apply the same method for your next steps in the admission process, right? And as I mentioned, many schools will open up access to their applications sometime between August and mid-September, but most schools do not ask you to commit an application until December. So in most cases, you will have a few months to attend virtual events, open houses, or on-campus prospective family offerings prior to making your decision about applying. So here are some recommendations I have for the try-it-on phase of your admission process, okay? So number one, do the best you can to stay close to the characteristics you created on your school, your list of school preferences, and try to stay aligned with your philosophy. So if a non-negotiable for your family is being in a school that promotes student independence and initiative, but you notice that there's some, hand-holding going on in the teaching methods, Make note of that observation or your gut feelings and ask clarifying questions. Think about whether or not you see your values reflected in the school's messaging. What is it that you feel the school celebrates when you browse their virtual materials, communications, or when you speak with community members? You know, a lot of schools now have Instagram, so you know, that's informational as well. What is their messaging? Second, you want to evaluate schools holistically. Okay, so if you're looking for quick comparative forms of surface level data, plenty of websites attempt to summarize schools in a snapshot. Just be careful about judging a school solely on their numerical data. For example, you might come across a school that boasts impressive SAT scores or college matriculation lists, right? But that school may be overly traditional in nature for your child, or it might have like a sink or swim feel to the academic atmosphere. The data can sometimes be helpful, but it certainly doesn't tell the whole story about a school culture. You also want to think about maybe what does the school leadership look like? Have there been any recent administration changes or administrative changes? And if so, what's the direction of the school? How is that changing? You know, and does that match, you know, kind of what you envision for your child or the philosophy you have? Consider also what is not addressed in the literature or other marketing materials. Asking questions to school people about or school personnel about what isn't promoted is equally as important as learning what is there. I think that was actually one of my favorite questions that I ever got from a prospective student in an interview was, you know, what can you tell me about Groton that's not on the website? And I thought that was awesome. I think that's important. You also want to try to connect with community members. The adults in school communities can be significantly impactful in your child's formative years. So try to get a sense of who the adults are in the community. And the best way to do this is by attending school events that feature a panel of community members, not just admission counselors. Another way you might gain this insight is to talk to families who currently attend the school, current students, even alumni. Dialogue with the school community members as much as possible and really try to diversify your sources of information. You don't want to just take one family's word for an environment because everybody is dealing with sort of different circumstances and different factors, okay? So diversify your sources of information. So is this a good fit? Essentially, you want to determine whether or not you have full family buy-in to the schools you're considering. If you don't buy into the culture for one reason or another, or you probably wouldn't take an offer from the school if given the opportunity, do not apply. Easy as that, right? Sounds easy. Okay, so last couple steps in the pyramid. Once we've chosen an outfit that feels good, right? So we've done all that stuff. We've picked what we want to wear. We tried it on. We feel good in it. We want to go out into the world and give it our best, right? And I think everybody knows what it feels like to move through the day feeling good about that classic statement piece or your favorite joggers or anything in between. The point is, whatever you choose to wear, you want to feel good so you can move through your days with confidence, right? So committing to the application process is no different. So let's talk about some ways to feel good about how you're representing yourself when it comes time to telling your story, okay? So everybody always wants to know how to produce a competitive application, especially given how selective admissions has gotten both at the secondary and college level over the last couple of decades. And the truth is, admission targets change every year. The applicant pools are different every year. And in my opinion, candidates are best served in this process when they focus on what they can control. When you commit to the application process at a school, it's important to lean deeply into the exercise and art form of telling your story. So schools love to hear about the layers of their candidates, right? So providing a well-rounded presentation of who you are is an essential aspect of building a strong candidacy for yourself. If a school wants to know about a very specific, specialized skill you or your child has, they'll ask more about it. But schools really want to enroll multidimensional, multifaceted students. So try to write or talk about your child or yourself in a way that reveals the unique layers. And don't be afraid to share perceptions on growing edges or areas of improvement. Schools really appreciate working with parents and students who, well, for parents, not only seem to know their child, but also recognize their potential for future growth, right? So balance is a big deal once you're in that application process. Introspection, honestly, I feel like the more introspection both you as a parent and your child can put into this process, the more fulfilling and enjoyable it'll ultimately be. Some of my most memorable interviews or application reads have been with students who were really unafraid to just kind of deep dive into their self-reflections. It was fun. They made it fun. I always really appreciated the kids that wanted to share those things with me. I felt like I was gaining sort of a unique insight into who they were. So kids and families who spend time really kind of examining why they're part of this process, or more importantly, why they're looking at a specific school, are far more likely to leave an impact as a candidate. The role that parents play here, if you're a parent listening, is in the form of engaging with your child through each stage of the process and being an active sounding board as they go through, this big deal of transitioning schools. Right? So kids are going through so many changes and challenges during this stage of adolescence, and getting them to spend time in reflection about who they are, how they behave, and what they value is definitely a worthwhile effort, not only for the admission process, but for them just generally as young human beings. Third, authenticity is huge. Admission counselors are not evaluating families for their ability to deliver canned responses. They don't want predictability. They want tangible anecdotes, insight, and transparency. And I can assure you, no matter where you're applying, admission counselors are doing their best to choose applicants they feel their school can best serve. And as a result, authenticity in this process is really critical and very much appreciated by those who are making the enrollment decisions. So the whole purpose of this process is to find the best fit, both for the family looking and the school enrolling. And that can't happen without being open about your family values or your child's needs. Okay, so the takeaway here is that a compelling application is dependent entirely on a family's commitment to effectively telling their story and providing admission teams with meaningful, memorable insight. Okay, so finally, when each day comes to an end, we all take care of our clothes in different ways, right? Some of us trek our garments to the laundromat, that's me, while others choose to dry clean, and then there are some that just sort of haphazardly spot clean or choose to ignore cleaning habits altogether. The point is, all of our actions have consequences, and the choices we make with our worn clothing is no exception, right? So why is it important to make similarly good decisions about how you follow up with schools, right? Well, communication with schools is essential throughout all stages. It's really kind of the building block or the foundation of your relationship with the school throughout the admission process, and then potentially beyond, right? So you can expect to be receiving and responding to correspondence with schools for a whole variety of reasons, such as RSVPing to events, questions about the admission process. Maybe you're expressing thanks for time spent during a visit, or maybe you just want to talk about how much you love their school, right? While admission officers are totally happy to hear from their prospective families, do understand that they're dealing with an incredibly high volume of email correspondence throughout the application season. So it's really important to do these three things here, which is, keep your communications pointed, intentional, and really plan to reach out only when you have thoughtfully kind of constructed your outreach. Okay. So, excuse me, that pretty much wraps up my content for now. This is sort of just an introductory how to get started in the process with more of a wider lens. But truthfully, there's so much more to cover. And I'd love to invite anyone listening to visit Evolved Education, visit our website and check out our full range of services. Specifically in the school placement division, we have a lot of expertise to offer to families, either through hourly consulting or a range of placement packages. So please feel free to book a complimentary call to learn more about how we can support your family. We do some great stuff at Evolved, including, outside of the school placement division, we do a lot for families in the form of test prep and also parent coaching as well. So please check us out, and thanks again for taking some time to seek out this information. And I look forward to connecting further with anybody who feels inclined to do so. Cheers.